Masechet Baba Batra Daf Lamed. We're going to be learning a few interesting cases. Here's the first one. Hahuda amar le lechavre, mai ba'it behai beta. Amar le minach zebinte va'achalit shene chazaka. Amar le ana bishchone gavai havai. There was someone that came to someone else and said, "What are you doing in my house?" In other words, you have an original owner of the house, comes to someone squatting in the house and says, "Why are you living in my house? Get out. I am the owner." And the person squatting there says, "I bought it from you, and I have been living here for the number of years of a chazakah, at least 3 years, and therefore it's mine." And he has a ta'ana, and he has a chazakah. However, the original owner says, "I have been living in an inside room, bishchone gavai." There are others who interpret this as in a distant place, but that's actually the next story coming up. Here, bishchone gavai, I have been living in the house in an inner room. Apparently, it's a large house that has multiple entrances, and the original owner was going in from one entrance into an inner room and living there the whole time. Meanwhile, this other guy has been coming in from a different entrance and living also in the house for 3 years. So this is a complicated case. What do we do? Ata lekamed Rav Nachman, amar le zir berod achi latach. Rav Nachman tells the squatter that you have to go and confirm your consuming of the house, your usage of the house, because the original owner says he has been living there the whole time. So now you have to confirm that you have been living there exclusively, and that you have the right of chazakah. Chazakah doesn't work if the original owner is also living in the house, and therefore, since the original owner has that claim and it's a valid claim, you go and bring proof. So Rav Nachman gave it to the original owner, unless the squatter could bring proof that he has been there exclusively for 3 years. Amar le Rava, hachidina hamosima chavero alav re'aya. Rava disagreed with Rav Nachman, and he said, "Is that the law?" After all, we say, if you want to extract money, then the person who extracts the money has to bring the proof from the one who has it. So we leave it in status quo. What's the status quo? Well, there's a squatter who has been there for 3 years. When I say squatter, I don't mean that he has it illegally. He has a proper ta'ana that he bought it, and he's been there, dwelling there for 3 years, and therefore he has the status quo. If the original owner wants to remove it from him, then the original owner should bring proof that he, in fact, has been there all those 3 years, and the other guy does not have a chazakah. And so this is a machloket. Basically, Rav Nachman gives it to the original owner, unless the other guy has proof. Rava gives it to the squatter, because he's been there for 3 years, unless the other guy has proof that he was also living there at the same time. Veramed Rava ad Rava. Veramed Rav Nachman ad Rav Nachman. Now we're going to bring another case where Rava and Rav Nachman both have an opinion about the second case, but it's the reverse of the first case in terms of, do you give it to the seller or to the alleged buyer? Here's the second case. Ta'ahud amar le lechavre, kol nichse debe bar sisin mazbin alach. Havai hahi ar'a tehava mikre debe bar sisin. Amar le ha lav debe bar sisin hi. Vakruye hu de mikraya debe bar sisin. So you had a guy who's told his friend, "I am going to sell you the entire estate of bar sisin." This guy, he bought some estate from bar sisin, or some estate that's called the bar sisin estate, and he owns it. That's the seller. And he says to the buyer, "I'm selling you the bar sisin estate." Okay, now, there was another piece of land that was called part of the bar sisin property, but was not technically part of that estate. And so the seller says, this part of this land over there, which I own, which is called from the house of Bar Sisin, it is not. I didn't buy that. I didn't get it from it wasn't originally part of the Bar Sisin estate. For some reason, people call it a Bar Sisin property, maybe because it was nearby, but I didn't get it from there. I got that from elsewhere, and just people call it that. So therefore, the seller is claiming that I'm going to give you the entire the official Bar Baris Yisin estate that I got from Baris Yisin, that I'm giving over to you, right? And they had already made a transaction. But that other piece of land that's just called Baris Yisin, I didn't have in mind to give that to you, so I'm not giving that to you. However, the buyer says, listen, you told me that you're going to give me all the Baris Yisin property. And this thing is part of the Baris Yisin property. Everybody knows. Everybody calls it that. And I assumed that I was going to buy that also. And you bring proof that this was not part of the Baris Yisin estate. And the seller says, no, you bring proof that it was part of it. And so this is they come to a lawsuit. Atula kamed Rav Nachman. Ukma bida de lokeach amar le Rava dina hachi hamosim achavero alav ha're'aya. So Rav Nachman says the buyer has the right to it. He gives it to the buyer unless the seller can prove that it really was not part of the Baris Yisin estate. It was just called that. Otherwise, he gives it to the buyer. And now this is a contradiction because in the first case, he gives it to the original owner, to the seller. And here, he gives it to the buyer, unless the other side has proof. Now Rava says the same principle now as he did before, but the application of the principle ends up being the opposite. So Rava says, is this the law? No, the burden of proof should be on the one who's trying to extract money. Now, and in this case, he gives it to the seller. So in the previous case, he gave it to the squatter, to the buyer, and in this case, he gives it to the seller. So now we ask, Kashya de Rava ad Rava, Kashya de Rav Nachman ad Rav Nachman. Rava seems to contradict himself, and Rav Nachman seems to contradict himself between these two cases. In the first case, Rav Nachman gave it to the original owner, and the second case he gives it to the buyer. In the original case, Rava gave it to the squatter. In the second case, he gives it to the seller. How can we resolve this? So the two statements of Rava do not challenge each other. There, in the second case of Baris Yisin, Rava said that the seller keeps it because the seller has the status quo. They just did the transaction. It hasn't been 3 years. And so therefore, the presumptive ownership, the status quo is with the seller. And therefore, he gives it to the seller unless the buyer who wants to remove property from the seller can prove otherwise. That's why he gives it to the seller there. Whereas here, in our case, regarding the inside room and the outside room, there, the buyer has been there for 3 years. He definitely has a chazakah. And so he is considered the presumptive owner, and that's the status quo. The original owner, he's making a claim, oh, I lived there the whole time in the inside room. So he wants to remove it from the chazakah. So that's the difference. It's the same principle, but who is considered the presumptive owner? In the first case, it's the one who has a chazakah. In this case of Baris Yisin, there is no chazakah of 3 years, and therefore the seller gets it. So Rava is consistent. He's just applying the same principle, but they apply differently in these two cases. The Rav Nachman ad Rav Nachman name la kashya. Kevan damar le debe Baris Yisin umikariya debe Baris Yisin ale dide ramya legaluye delav debe Baris Yisin he. In this case of the Baris Yisin property, since the seller said, I'm going to give you the estate of Baris Yisin, and this particular land that they're fighting about is called from the estate of Baris Yisin. Therefore, it's the responsibility of the seller to reveal, listen, at the time of the before the sale, he has to say, I'm going to sell you the estate of Baris Yisin. That thing that most people say is Baris Yisin is actually not. He has to specify that it's not. And since he did not specify, therefore the Rav Nachman says, I give it to the buyer, right, unless the seller can prove otherwise. But here, in our case, regarding the squatter and the guy in the inside room and the outside room, let's say there was a deed here, right? The actual deed, full proof of a deed. Would we not tell the person who brings the deed that he has to ratify the document? Even a deed, you have to come and ratify and make sure the signatures are real, that they really signed it. And so too here, where the buyer says, I have a chazakah. I've been living there for 3 years. Okay, we tell him prove it, right? This is just standard procedure. Even if he had a deed, we would make him ratify it. So ratify your chazakah and prove that you were there for 3 years without anybody else living there. That's what a chazakah is. And that's why in this case, Rav Nachman, in our case, Rav Nachman gives it to the original owner because the burden of proof is on the buyer to show that he really does have a valid chazakah. Next case, Haud amar le lechavre, mai ba'it behai beta, amar le minach zevinte v'achaltiha shene chazakah. אמר לה, בשוקי ברי הווי. אמר לה, והאית לי סהדה, תכל שתה הווה עתית תלתין יומה. אמר לה, תלתין יומה בשוקי הווה תרידנה. אמר רבה, עביד איניש, תכל תלתין יומה, תריד בשוקה. Someone came to someone else and said, what are you doing in my house? This is my house. He was the original owner, right? Get out of my house. And the squatter there says, I bought it from you, and I've been here for the years of chazakah, for over 3 years. That's totally valid. Now, the original owner comes and says, yeah, listen, I was away at the outer marketplace. I was far away, busy in the marketplace, and I never came to town. Yeah, apparently has somewhere else to live out there in the marketplace, and therefore, I never noticed that you were here to protest. So the fact that I didn't protest all 3 years does not prove that it's yours. Rather, I just wasn't around. I wasn't in the neighborhood to notice, and that's why I didn't protest. So therefore, your chazakah is no proof that you have it. The squatter has a counterclaim. He says, it's not true that you were away entire 3 years. I have witnesses that every year you came to this neighborhood and you were here for 30 days. And so you could have and should have seen that I was in your house during those 30-day intervals every year that you were here, and you should have lodged a protest. The fact that you didn't means that it's not yours and my chazakah is valid. I am not leaving. And so the original owner then comes and says, those 30 days that I came to town is true. I was in town, but I was busy in the marketplace. I was very busy. I'm a trader, and most of the year I'm away in the foreign market, and sometimes I come to the local market, but even when I'm here, I'm busy, and I don't have time to come and check on my house and see who's there and give a protest. But the fact that I didn't do it does not prove that it's yours. I didn't protest because I didn't know and I wasn't around. So they came to Rava, and Rava said that the original owner is in the right, because it does happen. This is a normal human behavior that people can be busy in the marketplace for 30 days, even when they're in town. Marketplace, it's very busy, and they don't have time to go and take care of other things. And so he said that he accepted the claim of the original owner and gave the house back to him. Next story. ההוא דאמר לה לחברה, מאי בעית בהי ארעה? אמר לה, מפלניה זבינתה, דאמר לי, דזבנה מינך. אמר לה, את לאו כמודית דהי ארעה דידיהי, ואת לזבינתה מיני זיל, לה בעל דברים דידי את. אמר רבה, דינה כאמר לה. Interesting case. Someone comes to someone else and says, what are you doing on my land? This is my land. Get off of my land. And the squatter says, I bought it from so-and-so, that guy, and he said that he bought it from you. So I have a chazakah. I've been here using this land for 3 years, and I have a claim. My claim is I bought it from someone who bought it from you. But the original owner says, listen, this is not a valid ta'ana. It's not a valid claim. You are admitting that this land is mine, meaning it was originally mine, because you just said that you bought it from someone who bought it from me. So you're admitting that I'm the original owner. I don't even have to prove that anymore. And you're also admitting that you did not buy it directly from me, because you yourself said, I bought it from someone who bought it from you. But here's the thing, I have bad news. The person who you bought it from never owned it. Do you have proof that the seller who sold it to you had it? Right? Did he have a deed? Do you know that it was his? And the guy's like, no. Well, he says, in that case, I am not legally answerable to you. La bal devarim didiat. You are not, I don't have to deal with you in court, right? You are just a random person who came and sitting on my land, and it's true you were here for 3 years, so you have a chazakah, but you don't have a legitimate ta'ana. If he said, I bought it from you directly, that would be a ta'ana. But you didn't say that. You said you bought it from someone who bought it from me, but that someone never owned it, and you have no proof that he owned it. and therefore you have to get out. Now, if they did have a deed that the middleman actually owned it, or he was there and he says, I saw you, that you sold it to that guy, that'll be a different story. Then it would be a valid ta'ana, but we're dealing with a case where he has no indication that that middleman owned it. And therefore, Rava came and said that this is an acceptable claim. The original owner can kick off the squatter because the squatter has no ta'ana. He has no valid claim about how he received the land, even though he was there for 3 years. Hahud amar le lechavre, mai bait behayar'ah. Amar le mipilanya zivina v'achartiha shene chazaka. Amar le pilanya gazlanahu. Again, someone comes to his friend and says, what are you doing in my land? This is my field. Get off of my field. And the squatter says, I bought it from some guy, let's call him Mr. Madoff, just for example, and I've been here for 3 years. I have a chazakah, and I have a valid ta'ana. I bought it from that guy, from Mr. Madoff. And then this guy, the claimant, the original owner, says, you bought it from Madoff? He's a robber. It was never his to begin with. He stole it from me. So you stole it from a robber. So you want to get your money back? Go after him. Good luck to you. But this is my land, and you don't have a ta'ana because it was never his to sell to you. Amar le v'ha'it li sahadi da'atai imlichi bach ve'amart li zil zeben. Here's where it gets very interesting. The squatter says, I have testimony that I came to you before, the claimant, the original owner, before I bought it from Mr. Madoff, I came to you and asked your advice. And I said, what do you think about this land that I'm about to buy? What do you think? Should I buy it? And you told me, yes, go and buy it. So therefore, isn't that proof? If this was yours, then, and it was stolen from you, then you would have said, but you want to buy that land? That's my land. That guy stole it, right? You can't buy that. I'm trying to get it back from that thief. You should have told me that, but you didn't say that. You said, yes, go and buy it, which means weren't you admitting by saying that it's not your land? I was following your advice in buying it. Amar lehasheni noach li, harishon kasher hemenu. And the claimant, the original owner, says, I advised you to buy the land. You know why? Because I would rather deal with you in court rather than with Mr. Madoff. You are easy to deal with. You're a nice guy. And therefore, I wanted to bring you to court. And that way, I'll say, this is my land. I can prove this is my land. I've been here for a long time, or I have a deed. And I would repossess the land from you because you got it illegally, and then let you can go and deal with Mr. Madoff because you are easier to deal with. The first guy, meaning the original thief, Mr. Madoff, he is difficult to deal with, and I didn't want to go and litigate with him. That's why I gave you that advice. That advice is not proof, indication that I didn't own the land and it wasn't stolen. It actually is the opposite. I told you to do it so that it would be easier for me to get the land back, and you can go and try to get your money back from that crazy thief. All right, interesting case. Rava dealt with the case. Amar Rava dina ka'amar le. And he says that the claim is a valid claim. The original owner gets the land back, and then that buyer will have to go and try to get his money back from the thief. Now we ask, Keman ke'admon. Rava here was following the Tana named Admon in the Mishnah in Ketubot. Ditnan. Ha'orer al hasadeh v'chatum aleha be'ed. Admon omer hasheni noach li harishon kasher hemenu. V'chamim omerim ibed et zichuto. The case there is similar to ours. It's a claimant who comes and says, this land is mine. He tells someone who lives on the land, and get off. But it turns out that claimant is signed on a deed of sale, that the current squatter bought it from some other guy, call him Mr. Madoff. Right? So the original owner, the alleged original owner who's coming and claiming, hey, this is my field, he signed on a deed of sale from some other guy to the current squatter. And so by signing that, isn't that proof that he agrees that it's not his own land? So that's the machloket. Admon said that the claimant can say, it's really my land all along. You know why I signed off on that field? Because I would rather deal with the buyer than the seller. The buyer is a nice guy, easy to deal with. I would rather take him to court take the field from him and let him go and get his money back from that Madoff seller. Whereas the first guy, that Madoff guy who stole it from me, he is a difficult guy to deal with, and I didn't want to have to bring him to court. That's why I signed on that deed of sale. But that was not an admission that it's not mine. Whereas Chachamim say, no, by signing on the deed of sale, he lost his right to the field. That's an admission that this is not mine. If someone comes with a deed of sale on your own field, this is, hey, can you sign off on this deed that someone is selling this field? You sign on it. That means that it's not yours. And so we see here that Rava, who said that the law is with the claimant, who he gave advice and said, yeah, go and sell it. Well, that's the same as Admon, who rules with the claimant that signed on the deed. But this is a problem. That means Rava is following a minority opinion of Admon against the majority Rabbanan. So we answer, Afilu tema Rabbanan. Hatam abad ile ma'aseh, aval hacha dibura, avidinish demikre ve'amar. It's different. Even Rabbanan would agree. Only in that case, in that Mishnah, where he actually did a deed by signing on a deed of sale, then he's doing an action, and an action is very serious. That means he totally agrees that that's admitting this is not my field, and relinquishes any rights he has to claim it. Whereas in this case that Rava ruled on, he just said, he asked him, what do you think? Should I buy that field? He says, yeah, go and buy it. Those are just words, and it's not as serious. And it could be that a person would likely just say casually, yeah, you know what, go and buy it. I'd rather deal with you than have to deal with the other guy. And that is not necessarily proof that it's not his. Hahud amar le lechavre, my ba'it behai ar'a, amar le mipelanya zebinte va'achalti hashene chazaka, amar le pelanya gazlanahu. Okay, the beginning of this case is similar to the previous ones. Someone comes to his friend and says, what are you doing on my land? This is my land, get off of it. And the squatter says, I bought it from that guy, you call him again Mr. Madoff, and I have a chazakah. I've been here for 3 years. And so the claimant says, Amale, that guy is a thief. He stole it from me. So you bought it from a thief, and therefore this is my land. And you have a chazakah, but you don't have a valid ta'ana. You don't have a valid claim. Amale itli sahadi da'tit be'orta ve'amart li zabena nihali. And now the squatter says, I have witnesses that you came to me last night and you told me, sell me that land. You asked me to sell it to you, which means that you're admitting it's not yours, right? Why, if it's yours, then you would come and say, hey, that's my land, right? You have to give it to me. Why, if you're the rightful owner, why would you come and tell me, sell me my land? If it's already, sell me that land. If it was your land, you would say, hey, you have to give me that land. So by saying, sell me that land, aren't you admitting that it's not really yours? That Mr. Madoff got it legitimately, and I bought it from a legitimate owner, and it's really mine. You admitted to that by asking me to sell it to you. Amarle Amina is bundinai. And the original owner says, I said, let me purchase what is rightfully mine, or let me purchase my litigation. Because Amarava avidinish tezabin dine. Rava said that claimant is right because sometimes people will buy something that they would have to otherwise litigate. In other words, just because he said, sell it to me, doesn't mean he's admitting it's not his. But rather, sometimes, someone steals something, and to go get it back in court is going to be such a pain. It's going to take a long time, and you have to pay lawyers. And someone might just shell out money and buy it again, even though it's really theirs. And that's what he was saying when the claimant says, that's what I was saying when I asked you sell it to me. I was just thinking, I want my land back. It's going to be hard to get it back. So I said, I'll pay for it again, even though it's really mine. But it was not an admission that it's not mine. And now that you bought it from that thief, I am actually going to take you to court and take it back because it is mine. And there's no admission that when I said sell it to me, that was not admission. You have a chazakah, but you don't have a valid ta'ana. And Rava says, yes, that is human nature, that a person may very well offer to buy something even though it's theirs already. Hahuda amar le lechavre, my ba'it behai ar'a, amar le mipelanya zebina, va'achalti hashene chazaka, amar le veha nakitna shetara, dizbani le mine ha'arba'e shene. Someone comes to his friend and says, "What are you doing on this land? This is my land." And the squatter says, "I bought it from that guy." Let's call the original owner Stephen, for example. And I bought it from Stephen, and I've been here the years of chazakah. Right now we're assuming that years of chazakah means 3 years. Now the claimant comes and says, "I have a deed that I bought it from Stephen 4 years ago. So your claim is that you've been sitting on this land for the years of a chazakah." So what does that mean? 3 years, and you bought it from Stephen. Even if what you say is perfectly true, so that means you bought it 3 years ago. But I have a deed that I bought it from Stephen 4 years ago. That means I bought it first. So when he sold it to you, he was selling you something that he had already sold to me, and therefore, even if you've been sitting there for 3 years, your claim is not valid because I bought it first. I have a deed to prove it. אמר לי, מי סברת שני חזקה תלת שני כאמינה, שני חזקה טובה כאמינה. And the squatter says, "I said years of chazakah. Did you think I meant only 3 years? I meant many years of chazakah. I was simply saying sufficient for a chazakah, which means at least 3 years, but actually I was there for more. I was there for longer than 3 years, longer than 4 years, and therefore I actually bought it before you, and therefore it's rightfully mine." Amar Rava, "Avidi inashe dekaru l'shene tuba shene chazaka." Rava decided in favor of the squatter because people in normal language will often call many years the years of chazakah. Even if it's not literally 3 years, it could be more years, then they'll still call it the years of chazakah. Now the Gemara qualifies this ruling, "V'hanemile dachala sheba dekadim dechazakah dehaishtara dehach aval shit en lecha mecha'a gedola mizo." This ruling, to give it to the guy who's squatting, would only be if he claims that he has a chazakah for 7 years. That way, his chazakah, he has a full 3 years before the other guy claims that he bought it, right? Because he was there for 3 years. 4 years ago, that this claimant claims that he bought it. And what we need is that the current squatter must have started and completed a full 3-year chazakah even before that 4th year, the 4 years ago, which means he would have had to start 7 years ago and already had a full chazakah by 765 years ago. Because otherwise, if he was there only 6 or less, then there's no greater protest than a deed of sale. If someone's the other buyer, the claimant, will say, "I have a deed of sale that it's mine in the middle of your chazakah." That's the same as a protest. That's a bigger protest. There's no bigger protest than that if I have a deed of sale that says it's mine. And therefore, he would have to claim, "I have it for at least 7 years. I bought it from Stephen. I was already had finished the chazakah before you bought it, and therefore it's clearly mine." In that case, we would leave it with the current squatter. But if it's less than 7 years, then the guy who holds the deed would have the stronger claim. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.